Hi, welcome to today's episode on postural management in recliner chair seating. In our previous episode, we talked about pressure care in seating, and we also had an episode on getting the right size chair. Well, today's episode will focus on postural management. So we'll look at what is posture, what are different postural presentations that you can get, and what are ways that we can either accommodate someone's posture or even correct posture. We'll go through things like your recliner chair mechanisms and how this can also help with postural management, or how it can even be detrimental to your posture. So first, let's talk about posture in general with seating. So why do we want to have good posture when we're sitting in a chair? So important thing with posture is that we want to have what we call a neutral sitting position or symmetrical. So we want to have alignment of our trunk, neck, head, or limbs. And we want to make sure that our pelvis is also in a neutral position, because typically our pelvis will dictate our posture as well. We also look at things like our anterior superior iliac spine, ASIS, and PSIS, which is our posterior superior iliac spine. So we want to look at what are the positions of those points. And we want to think of the role of gravity with all of this. So think of what is ideal posture. So ideal posture would be a neutral sitting position where we have alignment of our trunk, our neck, our head, our limbs. We have symmetry. We have a neutral pelvis. So our pelvis is not tilted too far forward or too far backwards. We have, if you look on a side profile view, we have that natural curvature of our spines. We'll have our cervical curve, which is by our neck. We'll have the thoracic curve that curves the other way, and then we'll have the lumbar curve that curves in again. So those are our natural spinal curvatures, but we can have abnormal curvatures in our spine. We can have rotations, obliquities in our pelvis. We can have tilted pelvises. So all these things will affect our posture, and we also want to always remember that gravity will always play a role as well. So if you think of someone's posture or even your own posture, if you're sitting in a chair, initially when you sit in the chair for the first few seconds, you're going to sit really nice and upright, it's going to be neutral, it's going to be symmetrical. But with gravity, with fatigue setting in, we are going to start being pulled down. So we're going to start slouching because we are now struggling to fight gravity. We maybe start sliding kind of backwards and sitting on our tailbone with a kind of slouched sitting position. Or we might end up leaning towards one side to use the armrest to support us to stay upright. We might even use our hands to kind of reposition ourselves to sit upright again. So we end up trying to find ways to either maintain our posture, to fight the effects of gravity and fatigue. And it's very important to look at what is our chair doing to support us to maintain a good posture. Always remember that when you have proximal stability, you have distal ability. So if your body is supported to remain upright by your chair, you have the use of your hands, your limbs, to be able to interact with your environment, to be able to eat, to be able to do an activity like preparing food, because you don't have to use your hands or your arms to keep yourself upright. But there's actually quite a few reasons why posture is important, which could be muscle tone as well. It could be that someone needs to maintain a good posture to prevent abnormal muscle tone. We could have posture affecting comfort. So if I'm sitting in a poor posture over time, I'm going to start getting pains. I'm going to start getting extra pressure on certain areas. I could have one elbow, one buttock. I could have that impacted physiological functions as well. So there's actually a physio, her name is Sharon Sutherland. She's in Ireland, and she actually has this term which she uses to explain posture, and she calls this area by our torso our life box, because we have a lot of essential organs in that area, let's think of our diaphragm, which affects breathing. We have our stomach, we have intestines. We have a lot of important things that are housed in that life box. So if we slouch forward, if we are leaning towards one side, if we have possibly a twisted or a abnormal posture, we are in some cases decreasing the size of that life box. And what's happening is it's decreasing breathing, circulation, digestion. It's having an effect on a lot of physiological functions, which is why we want to maintain. So now that we know what ideal posture looks like, let's talk about your abnormal postural presentations, or what are some of the postural presentations you might see in your clients. So we could have what we call a scoliosis. So this is when you look at the front of the person from the front view, they're going to have either a C or an S shape of the spine. So we might have someone that's kind of leaning towards one side. You'll see that their spine is not in that neutral position. Then we can get a kyphosis. So this is where the person is kind of hunched forward. So what a lot of people will call a hunchback presentation. This is something you might see, especially in your elderly population, where their core strength is affected. So they kind of naturally start going into this kind of slouched over position. And what's happening is we're now taking away our curvature by our lumbar area. So it's actually flattening it out more. And we're possibly reducing the curvature by the neck as well. So that's possibly going to have the person's head turned more downwards instead of having their head upwards. And when we have our head turned downwards, we actually have our head kind of putting us even more down. Whereas if we have our head nicely above our shoulders, it's a lot easier for us to keep our head up as well, instead of having to use our hands or something like that to support our head up. So that is our kyphosis. And this is something you'll be able to see from a side view. Then we have our lordosis. And this could be where someone has a very pronounced curvature of their lumbar spine. And what will happen a lot with these clients is that they will have, they could potentially get back pain, where they don't have enough support in their back. So their back isn't fully in contact with the backrest. And now we don't have equal pressure distribution. We don't have the back supported, and the person gets back pain. We also can get that case with that kyphosis, where the lumbar area is completely flat. There is no curvature, which also could cause pain. So we want to have a curvature in the lumbar area, but we don't want to have an excessive curve, which is something that you could see in someone that has that anterior pelvic tilt. So if you tilt your pelvis forward, you can feel how your back curves in a bit more. So you'll need to have a lot more support in your backrest. Then we can get that pelvic tilt. So we can get the anterior pelvic tilt, which is not a very common one that you'd see, but that is where your ASIS, your anterior superior iliac spine, is tilted more forward. So it's a bit lower. Then your PSIS, the posterior superior iliac spine, is going to be a bit higher up. And then we have the posterior pelvic tilt. So this is where you have that slouched sacral sitting position, which is what a lot of people will go into when they start getting tired. They start slouching in the chair. And with this position, we are also taking away curvature of our lumbar spine, and head will be typically turned down. We can potentially over time develop a kyphosis, and we'll have a lot of pressure on the sacrum, and the person will start sliding out of the chair with gravity. Then we have different, what we call rotations and obliquities with the pelvis. So I'll first start with rotation. So imagine you're looking from the top, like you're looking down on someone sitting in a chair. If you're looking at the top view, you might find that it looks like one leg might be longer than the other one. So it could look like a leg length discrepancy. But when you look at their pelvis, you'll find that one side of their pelvis is actually more forward than the other side. So the right side might be more forward than the back. So they might have, let's say their left pelvis is actually in contact with the backrest, but the right side is actually, there's a little bit of a gap between my pelvis or the back of my lower back, my buttocks, and the backrest might not be in contact. And then we can get what we call a pelvic obliquity, where the one side of the pelvis is higher up than the other one. So the one PSIS or ASIS is higher up from the other sides, ASIS and PSIS. And this is what we call an obliquity. So this might be where someone has excessive pressure on one IT or sitting bones, and the other one isn't in contact with the seat. So we have one that's offloaded, one is loaded, but because they're not spread equally, we're getting excessive pressure on one, and that's where we're going to get a pressure injury. So when we have someone that has an abnormal postural presentation, we have two ways to go about it. We can either accommodate or support that posture. So let's say it's a fixed posture. It's a posture that I can't push them into a neutral posture that's fixed. I want to support them to not get worse, so there's not a worse posture, and that they're not getting tired in that position. So they're just getting, so let's say they're in a kyphosis, just slouching more and more, and they're not having that support, and there's going to be maybe excessive pressure in certain areas. But then we can also get correction. And this is where someone does have a reducible or non-fixed posture. So this is where I can still move the person's hips a bit. They can still bring themselves in an upright position. Maybe their default is to be in a slouched position, but if they have enough support from their chair, they can actually sit upright. That's what we would call reducible. And this is where we can help correct, or support and correct posture. So we can support them to maintain that really nice, upright, neutral posture. But we can also, in some cases, correct. So maybe someone needs to gradually be moved into that neutral position. So if we feel like there is still some ability for movement, let's say that the reason the person is in kind of this contracted posture could be because they have tightness in the hamstrings. So maybe over time we can stretch the muscles that they can have good range in their knee, for example. But we need, or let's say the hamstrings is the reason they're slouching forward. So we can correct it, or if they have a lean to the side, if we have a nice lateral support, they can stay upright, and maybe we can over time bring them more to that midline. So always remember, what is the goal? Am I correcting? Am I accommodating? Am I supporting? Which is the one that I'm going for? So let's go into what can I provide in terms of postural supports when I look at a recliner chair. So with recliner chairs, we could potentially have different types of backrests. So we could have a backrest that has filling that can be removed. We could potentially stuff one area more than the other. So let's say someone has a stroke, they need a little bit more support on one side. We could potentially build up one pillow a bit more on that area. Or let's say they have a that pelvic rotation where the one hip's more forward than the other. We might build up, let's say it's the right side that's a bit more forward than the left. We can build up the right side of the cushions to meet the person so that there isn't that area that's not in contact with the backrest. Or we could have someone that has the kyphosis. Now, we know that with someone with kyphosis, their spine tends to stick out a little bit more, so they typically get pressure injuries on the spine. So we could potentially look at changing the orientation of our seat backrest cushions, and we can have them, instead of being horizontal, we can have them vertical. So let's say you have free seat cushions, your head area, your kind of shoulder, upper back area, and then your lower back cushion. What you could potentially do is keep your headrest, but your two lower sections you can put vertically, and then have this gap in the middle where we can offload the spine, and we can actually have the person immerse into the backrest instead of being curved away from their backrest. Or if we have the scoliosis, we could have the person going more and more into this curved posture. So we might want to have what we call 3 points of control, where we can support maybe with 2 laterals on one side and kind of a counter force on the other side to help them maintain a more as close as possible to neutral position. Or if we think of our lordosis, someone has a very increased lumbar spine, we might want to add more filling into the cushion that's going into our lumbar area. So it's actually fully in contact with that area of the back. Because a lot of times what end up doing is they'll put a cushion into that area extra, but that can move around. So we want to see if we can actually adjust the recliner chair backrest itself to be able to do that. And then we can also get accessories that we could add to our recliner backrest. And this could be things like laterals, so external laterals that get added in that can provide support at specific areas. We could have alternative backrests like a cocoon backrest where you have different pockets. You have your laterals, you have a lumbar area, and you might have 2 more pockets that you can adjust the filling, and that can then provide lateral support as well as a lumbar support. Or you might want to have support by the hips to help with any pelvic instabilities, so try and bring the pelvis into a more neutral position. All those things can be done with different accessories. So it depends on what recliner chair you're looking at, but this would be if you need a customizer for someone that has a what we call mild to moderate postural presentation. Now, other than accessories, our recliner chair mechanisms or functions can actually also have an impact on our posture. Now, we mentioned in a previous episode tilt and space and backrest recline. Now, tilt and space and backrest recline are very good for pressure distribution, but it's also really important for maintaining a good posture. So firstly, let's look at backrest recline, because backrest recline can be misunderstood, where people can actually use it incorrectly. In a lot of cases, I've had clients where they'll be in a facility potentially, and their caregivers will want to let them rest in the chair for a bit, and what they'll end up doing is they recline the backrest. What happens is that we're opening up that angle, the seat to backrest angle is opening up, and then the person goes into that posterior pelvic tilt. They're sliding down the chair. They're squashing their life box. They have this closed posture. Their head's hanging forward. But if we have tilt and space, we have the same backrest to seat angle, but the chair just tilts back. We can maintain what we call that 90-degree ideal posture, but now instead of having gravity act against us, so gravity is pulling me down, gravity is having me slouch forward, I'm actually having gravity assist me, because now gravity is pulling me back and helping me keep this open posture, this open life box, which is why in a lot of cases, some suppliers will actually call tilt and space a zero gravity feature or function, which if you think about it, we're not taking away gravity. We can't take away gravity unless we put our clients on the moon. But what we're doing is we're having gravity assist us to maintain a good posture, because now I can stay towards the very back of the backrest and I'm not going to slide out of the chair because I'm maintaining that really good angle. And I can, after I've tilted back, I can now open the backrest because now I'm not going to slide out of the chair. So backrest recline can be bad for posture, but it's okay to use backrest recline if you're using it after you've done your tilt and space. So tilt and space needs to come first, and tilt and space is going to help you to maintain a good posture. If you're thinking of someone that has a kyphosis with their head turned down, their visual field's kind of reduced to the floor. When we use tilt and space, we can actually naturally, with the chair, bring them into a position where they do have their visual field elevated without them having to strain to look up. So a tilt and space is very beneficial for your kyphotic clients, and I've even heard where OTs have used tilt and space with the backrest recline for that kyphotic client to help them to lean a bit more back instead of being hunched forward. So let's just do a quick recap of today's episode. So we talked about what is posture, how posture affects a lot of different things like your physiological functions or pressure distribution, your muscle tone, how it promotes comfort. And then we talked about different postural presentations, your kind of abnormal postural presentations, and how we can use accessories to correct, support, or accommodate someone's posture. And then we covered different mechanisms of the chair, such as your tilt in space and backrest recline, and how that can also assist with posture. And how backrest recline can be detrimental for your posture, but in combination with tilt in space, it can be good for your posture and help you to maintain a good posture. Stay tuned for our next episode on transfers with recliner chairs.